My name is Elliot Granger. I'm 38 years old, and I work as a financial manager here in Charleston, South Carolina. For the past 12 years, I've built my career analyzing numbers, spotting patterns, and identifying risks before they become problems. It's a skill that served me well professionally. I never imagined I'd need to use those same instincts to save myself from my own wife. Marissa and I had been married for 6 years. She was 34, worked in marketing for a local firm, and I thought we had built something solid together. We owned a beautiful colonial house in Mount Pleasant, had healthy savings, and I'd invested wisely in both traditional accounts and a diversified portfolio. Life felt stable, predictable even, but around January of this year, things started changing. Small things at first. Marissa began keeping her phone face down during dinner. She'd step outside to take calls, claiming they were work-related. When I'd ask about her day, her answers became vague, almost rehearsed. The woman who used to share every detail of her office drama suddenly had nothing to say. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists like this video, and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. The real alarm bells started ringing in February. I was having lunch downtown when I spotted Marissa at Cafe Luna, about 3 blocks from my office. She was alone, speaking intensely into her phone. I couldn't hear the full conversation, but I caught fragments as I walked closer. "It's almost ready," she said, her voice carrying an urgency I'd never heard before. "We can start fresh soon." Start fresh? We'd never discussed starting anything fresh. If anything, we'd been talking about renovating our kitchen and maybe planning a vacation to Hilton Head for our anniversary. I didn't confront her immediately. In my line of work, you learn to gather data before making decisions. Over the next week, I paid closer attention. Marissa had developed new habits. She'd wake up early to check her phone in the bathroom. She'd volunteer to run errands alone. Trips that used to take 30 minutes now lasted 2 hours. When I asked where she'd been, she'd give me that same vague smile and say something about traffic or running into a friend. Then came the conversation that changed everything. It was a Thursday evening in late February. Marissa sat me down at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and that serious expression she usually reserved for discussing major purchases. "Elliot," she said, "I think we need to get organized financially." "Organized how?" I asked. "Well, all our accounts, passwords, everything should be in one place. You know, in case something happens." This struck me as odd. Marissa had never shown interest in our financial details beyond her own checking account. She knew I handled the investments, the mortgage, the major decisions. Why the sudden concern? "What brought this on?" I asked carefully. "Oh, I was talking to some friends at work. They said married couples should have everything accessible to both parties." Makes sense, right? It didn't make sense. Not from Marissa, not suddenly, and definitely not with that forced casualness in her voice. That weekend, I decided to review our accounts more carefully. What I found made my blood run cold. There had been several small transfers from our joint savings to her personal checking account over the past 6 weeks. Nothing huge, just $400 here, $600 there. Amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts, but consistent enough to suggest a pattern. I printed out the statements and studied them the way I'd analyze a client's portfolio. The timing was deliberate. The amounts were calculated. This wasn't impulsive spending. This was preparation. Sunday night, I called my old college roommate, David Hutchinson. He's a family law attorney here in Charleston, and I trusted him completely. "Dave," I said, "I need some hypothetical advice." "Hypothetical?" he repeated, his tone suggesting he knew better. If someone suspected their spouse was planning to divorce them and take half of everything, what would be the best way to protect their assets legally? There was a pause. "Elliot, how soon do you think this hypothetical situation might become reality?" "Soon," I admitted. "Then we need to talk. Tomorrow morning. And Elliot, don't move any money until we speak." David's office is located in a converted Victorian house on Broad Street. the kind of place that screams old Charleston money and legal expertise. I arrived at 8:30 Monday morning with a folder containing every piece of documentation I could gather. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, and insurance policies. "Tell me everything," David said, pouring coffee from an expensive-looking machine behind his desk. I laid out the timeline methodically. The behavioral changes, the secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in our finances, and most importantly, the unauthorized transfers from our joint account. David listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and studied me. "How much are we talking about in total assets?" he asked. "The house is worth about $540,000. We owe $230 on the mortgage. Savings accounts total roughly $85,000. My 401k has about $320,000. And my investment portfolio is sitting at around $280,000. David whistled softly. "So we're looking at over $1 million in total assets she could potentially claim half of." That's what I figured. "Elliot, I'm going to be direct with you. If Marissa files for divorce in South Carolina, she's entitled to claim half of everything acquired during the marriage. The house, the savings, even a portion of your retirement accounts. But there are legal ways to protect yourself if you act quickly and carefully." He explained the concept of an irrevocable trust. Essentially, I could transfer ownership of my assets to a third party, in this case my mother, Patricia Granger, while maintaining certain usage rights. The key was that once assets were in the trust, they were no longer considered marital property. "The transfers have to be completed before she files for divorce," David warned. "And they have to be documented properly. We're talking about a significant amount of paperwork and some upfront legal fees, probably around $12,000. "How long do we have?" "Based on what you've told me, I'd say we need everything completed within 3 to 4 weeks. This isn't something we can rush, Elliot. Asset transfers of this magnitude require proper documentation, title searches, notarizations, and filing with multiple agencies. We need to do this right." I left David's office with a clear action plan and a timeline that felt tight but manageable. That afternoon, I called my mother from my office at First National Bank of Charleston, where I've worked for the past 8 years. "Mom, I need to ask you a favor, and it's going to sound strange. Patricia Granger is 72 years old and sharp as a tack. She raised me as a single mother after my father died when I was 15, and she's never been one to sugarcoat difficult situations. It's about Marissa, isn't it?" she said immediately. "How did you—" "Elliot, I've been watching that girl for 6 years. She's not the same person she was when you married her. What's she done now?" I explained the situation, and Mom didn't hesitate. "Whatever you need me to do, we'll do it. That woman is not going to destroy what you've worked for." Over the next 3.5 weeks, David and I worked systematically through every asset. The house deed transfer required a comprehensive title search, property appraisal, and coordination with the mortgage company to ensure the transfer wouldn't trigger acceleration clauses. My investment accounts had to be liquidated and reconstituted within the trust structure, a process that took nearly 2 weeks due to various holding periods and transfer requirements. Even my savings transfer required establishing new trust accounts and updating all automatic deposits and withdrawals. The most delicate part was timing everything so Marissa wouldn't notice. I scheduled all appointments during her work hours and made sure confirmations went to my office. David handled most of the paperwork during business hours, and we used a mobile notary service that could meet us at his office after 6 p.m. to avoid any chance of Marissa seeing legal documents at home. Meanwhile, Marissa's behavior became even more suspicious. She started working late 4 nights a week, something she'd never done before. When I'd offer to bring her dinner, she'd decline, saying she'd grab something with colleagues. On a Wednesday evening in mid-March, she brought up our finances again. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" she asked over dinner at Husk, one of our usual spots downtown. "About organizing everything?" "Right. I really think we should put together a comprehensive list of all our accounts and passwords. You know, in case of emergencies." "What kind of emergencies are you worried about, Marissa?" She hesitated just long enough to confirm my suspicions. "Oh, just general preparation. You never know what might happen." "I'll think about it," I said, cutting into my shrimp and grits. On March 20th, I got confirmation from David that all transfers were complete and legally binding. Every asset I'd accumulated over 6 years of marriage was now protected in an irrevocable trust. On paper, I owned virtually nothing except my monthly salary and about $6,000 I'd left in our checking account to avoid raising suspicions. The timing couldn't have been better, because 3 days later on a Saturday morning, Marissa made her move. I was reading the Charleston Post and Courier in our kitchen when she sat down across from me with a manila envelope and that same forced, serious expression. "Elliot, we need to talk." She slid the envelope across the table. Inside were divorce papers, already filled out with her attorney's information, and a detailed list of demands. Half the house value, half the savings, half my retirement accounts and spousal support of $2,800 per month for 2 years. I read through the documents carefully, using every bit of self-control I'd developed in 12 years of client meetings to keep my expression neutral. "This is quite thorough," I said finally. "I've been thinking about this for a while," Marissa said, not meeting my eyes. "We've grown apart, Elliot. I think it's better if we both start fresh." Start fresh, the same phrase I'd heard her use on that phone call weeks earlier. "And you want half of everything. That's fair, isn't it? I mean, we built this life together." I set the papers down and looked at my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, sitting across from me in the kitchen of a house she thought she owned half of. "When do you want to do this?" I asked. She looked surprised by my calm response. "My attorney can schedule mediation as soon as next week." "That works for me," I said, standing up to pour another cup of coffee. "Should be interesting." The mediation was scheduled for Thursday, April 4th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The location was a neutral conference room at the Charleston County Family Court Building on Broad Street, a sterile environment designed to facilitate civilized divorce proceedings. Marissa arrived with her attorney, Rebecca Martinez, a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s who specialized in high-asset divorces. I could tell by the confident way they walked into the room that they expected this to be straightforward. After all, they had documentation of our assets, bank statements, property records, everything they needed to claim exactly half of what they believed I owned. I arrived with David and a briefcase containing documents that would change everything. "Good afternoon, everyone," said the mediator, Patricia Coleman, a retired family court judge who now handled private mediation cases. "I've reviewed the preliminary filings, and it appears we have a fairly standard asset division case." Rebecca Martinez opened her folder and smiled professionally. "Your Honor, Mrs. Granger is seeking an equitable distribution of marital assets. The house valued at $540,000, minus the outstanding mortgage of $230,000. Savings accounts totaling $85,000, retirement accounts worth approximately $320,000, and investment portfolios valued at $280,000. She continued, "Additionally, given Mrs. Granger's contribution to the household and her reduced earning capacity, due to supporting Mr. Granger's career advancement, we're requesting spousal support in the amount of $2,800 monthly for a period of 24 months. The mediator turned to David. "Mr. Hutchinson, does your client dispute any of these asset valuations?" "No disputes with the valuations, Your Honor," David replied calmly. "However, we do dispute the characterization of these assets as marital property subject to division." Rebecca frowned. "I'm not sure I understand. These assets were clearly accumulated during the course of the marriage." "That's correct," David said, opening his briefcase. "However, as of March 20th, 2 weeks before divorce proceedings were initiated, all assets in question were legally transferred to an irrevocable trust established for the benefit of Patricia Granger, Mr. Granger's mother." The silence in that room was deafening. I watched Marissa's face change from confident to confused to horrified in the span of about 10 seconds. "What does that mean?" Marissa asked, looking between her attorney and David. Rebecca was studying the documents David had placed on the table. Her professional composure was cracking. These appear to be legitimate trust documents and transfer records. They are completely legitimate, David confirmed. Filed with the Charleston County Clerk of Court, and properly executed with all required notarizations and witnesses. Mr. Granger no longer owns the house, the investment accounts, or the savings. He has the legal right to occupy the residence under a rental agreement with the trust, and he maintains beneficiary status for the investment accounts, but he does not own these assets. The mediator examined the paperwork. And when were these transfers executed? All transfers were completed between February 26th and March 20th, David replied, well before any divorce proceedings were initiated. Marissa was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. But that's not, you can't just, how is that legal? It's perfectly legal, the mediator confirmed. Asset protection through legitimate trust structures is a common practice. The key factor is timing. These transfers occurred before divorce proceedings began. Rebecca cleared her throat, trying to regain control of the situation. We'd like to request a recess to review these documents and explore potential challenges to the trust structure. Of course, the mediator agreed. During the break, I could hear Marissa and Rebecca having a heated conversation in the hallway. Marissa's voice kept rising above what could be considered appropriate courtroom volume. When we reconvened 30 minutes later, Rebecca had clearly delivered some unwelcome news to her client. Marissa's eyes were red, and she kept glancing at me with a mixture of disbelief and what I can only describe as panic. After reviewing the documentation, Rebecca said, we believe there may be grounds to challenge the trust as a fraudulent transfer intended to defeat spousal rights. David had anticipated this argument. Your Honor, I'd like to point out several factors that demonstrate the legitimacy of these transfers. First, Mr. Granger consulted with legal counsel before making any moves, ensuring full compliance with South Carolina law. Second, the transfers were made to his mother, a family member with legitimate estate planning purposes, not to hide assets from creditors. Third, Mr. Granger retained only minimal amounts in accessible accounts, enough to meet household obligations, but not enough to suggest he was hiding significant liquid assets. He continued, most importantly, these transfers were made in response to concerning financial behavior from Mrs. Granger, including unauthorized withdrawals from joint accounts totaling nearly $1,800 over a 6-week period. That last part hit Marissa like a physical blow. She hadn't realized I'd been tracking those small transfers. The mediator reviewed the trust documents one more time. The transfers appear to have been executed properly and with legitimate purposes. Without clear evidence of fraudulent intent, I don't see grounds for setting aside the trust structure. Rebecca tried one more angle. What about the timing? Surely the proximity to the divorce filing suggests intent to defraud. The documentation shows that Mr. Granger initiated these estate planning measures after discovering suspicious financial activity and behavioral changes, the mediator replied. Protecting one's assets from potential fraudulent claims is not the same as fraudulently concealing assets from legitimate claims. Marissa finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. So there's nothing? No house? No savings? Nothing? Under the current trust structure, the mediator explained, Mr. Granger's available assets for division consist of his monthly salary, approximately $6,000 in checking accounts, and his personal property. The trust assets are not subject to marital property division. The final blow came when David presented additional documentation. We've also prepared a counter-petition requesting that Mrs. Granger reimburse the marital estate for the unauthorized withdrawals totaling $1,800, plus interest and legal fees. Rebecca quickly reviewed the bank statements David provided. The pattern of small transfers was undeniable, and they were clearly made without Mr. Granger's knowledge or consent. This mediation is concluded, the mediator announced. Mrs. Granger, you have the right to pursue litigation if you believe there are grounds to challenge the trust. But based on the documentation presented today, your divorce settlement will be limited to the assets currently available in Mr. Granger's name. As we packed up our materials, I could see Marissa whispering frantically with her attorney. Rebecca was shaking her head repeatedly, obviously explaining that pursuing litigation would be expensive and unlikely to succeed. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete peace of mind. The real story began to unfold over the following weeks. With her divorce strategy in ruins, Marissa became increasingly desperate and, frankly, reckless. She started making demands that revealed just how calculated her original plan had been. 3 days after the mediation, she called me at work. "Elliot, we need to talk. This whole trust thing is ridiculous. Just reverse it, and we can split everything fairly." The trust is irrevocable, Marissa. That's the point of the word irrevocable. Your mother will do whatever you ask her to do. Actually, she won't. Mom takes legal documents very seriously. She's not going to dissolve a trust just because you asked nicely. There was a long pause. I never wanted it to be like this. Really, because the divorce papers you presented were pretty specific about wanting exactly half of everything I'd worked for. That conversation ended with her hanging up on me. But the most revealing moment came the following week. I was having dinner at Fleet Landing downtown when I overheard a conversation at the table behind me. 2 women were discussing someone who sounded remarkably familiar. "She's been calling everyone, asking for loans," one woman said. "Apparently her divorce didn't go the way she planned. Marissa always thought she was smarter than everyone else," the other replied. "Remember how she used to brag about her exit strategy from her marriage?" I turned slightly and confirmed my suspicion. It was Jennifer Walsh and Susan Torres, 2 women from Marissa's marketing firm. They were discussing my soon-to-be ex-wife. "The worst part is Jake," Jennifer continued. "He's been completely ghosting her since the mediation. Won't return her calls, won't meet for coffee. Turns out he was only interested when there was money involved." Jake. Finally, a name to go with the mysterious influence I'd suspected. That weekend, I did something I normally wouldn't do. I checked Marissa's social media accounts. We were still technically married, so I still had access to her Facebook and Instagram. What I found confirmed everything. There were months of private messages between Marissa and Jake Holloway, an account manager at her firm. The conversations started innocent enough, but by January they had evolved into detailed discussions about securing your future and not letting him keep everything. Jake's messages were particularly revealing. "You deserve half of everything he's built," he'd written in early February. "Don't let him intimidate you with financial talk. Get a good lawyer and take what's rightfully yours." Another message from late February read, "Once you're free from him, we can really start our life together. Think about it. With your settlement money, we could buy a place in Kiowa Island." But the messages from after the mediation told a completely different story. Jake's responses became shorter, less enthusiastic. By late April, he was barely responding to her messages at all. The final message from him was brutally simple. "This isn't working out. I think we should keep things professional from now on." Marissa's responses became increasingly desperate. "But you said we had a future together. You can't just abandon me now." "I gave up everything for you." The truth was becoming clear. Marissa hadn't developed these ideas about divorce and financial settlements on her own. Jake Holloway had been whispering in her ear, painting pictures of a wealthy future together funded by my life's work. When the money disappeared, so did Jake's interest in their relationship. 2 weeks after the mediation, Marissa moved out of the house. She rented a small apartment in West Ashley, about 20 minutes from downtown. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned she was struggling financially. Without access to our joint accounts, she was living on her marketing salary alone, something she hadn't done since we got married. Her attempts to challenge the trust went nowhere. Rebecca Martinez had been honest about the likelihood of success, and Marissa couldn't afford to pay for a prolonged legal battle with such slim chances of victory. The trust documents were rock solid, and the timing of the transfers made it impossible to argue fraudulent intent. But perhaps the most satisfying justice was completely natural. Word spread quickly through Charleston's relatively small professional community about what had happened. The marketing firm where Marissa and Jake worked started distancing themselves from the situation. Jake was quietly transferred to a different division, and Marissa found herself increasingly isolated at work. Friends who had known us as a couple began reaching out to me, sharing stories about conversations Marissa had had months earlier. Apparently, she'd been quite open about her plans to upgrade her lifestyle through divorce. People remembered her jokes about retirement planning and her comments about deserving compensation for years of marriage. The social consequences were swift and decisive. Invitations stopped coming. Mutual friends chose sides, and they overwhelmingly chose mine. Marissa's reputation in Charleston's social circles was effectively destroyed. In early June, 2 months after the mediation, I received a final text message from Marissa. "I'm sorry, Elliot. I made a terrible mistake. Can we please try to work this out?" My response was brief. "The divorce will be final next month. I wish you well. Today, I'm living comfortably in the house I've worked 12 years to afford. My investment accounts, safely managed in my mother's trust, are performing better than ever. I've been promoted to senior financial manager at the bank, partly because my colleagues were impressed by how I handled my personal financial crisis. Marissa, as I understand it, is still working at the same marketing firm, still living in that small apartment in West Ashley. Jake Holloway transferred to the company's Atlanta office, and according to LinkedIn is engaged to someone else entirely. The divorce was finalized in July. Final settlement. Marissa received half of that $6,000 I'd left in checking, $3,000, plus her personal belongings and her car. No spousal support, no house, no retirement accounts, no investment portfolio. I learned something valuable through this experience. True security doesn't come from trusting people to do the right thing. It comes from being prepared when they don't. My financial training taught me to identify risks and hedge against them. I just never thought I'd need to apply those skills to my own marriage. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty about protecting my assets. The answer is simple. Absolutely not. Marissa made her choices based on greed and deception. Jake made his choices based on opportunism. I made my choices based on protecting what I'd legitimately earned. The most beautiful part of this whole situation is that I never had to lie, cheat, or break any laws. I simply used the legal system exactly as it was designed to be used. When someone tries to take advantage of you, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's being smarter. As my mother told me after everything was settled, "Son, you can't control what people try to do to you, but you can control how prepared you are when they try." Words to live by. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and ring the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.